Right after the funeral of my mother-in-law, whom I loved as if she were my own mom, a letter arrived from her. The letter was delivered to our home by a lawyer. My name is Catherine, and I'm 43. The letter began, "If this letter has reached you, it means I'm no longer in this world. I'm worried you might be crying." Tears welled up in my eyes as I recognized the familiar handwriting of my mill. My father-in-law had passed away at a young age, long before my husband and I got married. And there were hardly any close relatives in the in-laws family, so there was virtually no interaction with relatives. My husband and I were not blessed with children, so the three of us, my mill, my husband, and I lived a modest but happy life. My mill and I were so close that my husband would often say, "It's like you two are the real mother-daughter duo, and I'm the son-in-law." Last year, I lost my husband to cancer, and it was just my mill and me. However, she unexpectedly became a victim of a traffic accident. There were many mysteries surrounding the accident. For some reason, she was found lying on a road in a city far from our home, seemingly unrelated to us, and was hit by a passing car. Both accident and potential foul play angles are being investigated by the police. But her purse, which she should have had, is missing. I was questioned by the police about various circumstances, but there was much I didn't know, and I was too shocked to answer properly. I'm struggling to come to terms with my mill's sudden passing. In my husband's case, he fought his illness for a year, and we did everything we could in terms of treatment. With my mill there, we both had the chance to remember him and say our goodbyes. We had vowed to overcome our grief together and continue living closely bonded. The funeral and all the paperwork kept my mind occupied, but once everything was done, the loneliness hit hard. Both my parents passed away from cancer. I have a brother, but he's living in a distant countryside with his family. I'd love to reconnect with friends from college, but they are all busy raising kids, so it feels awkward to reach out. As I was wondering what to do next, I received a call from a man claiming to be an attorney. Judging by the tone of his voice, he seemed to be around the same age as my mill, maybe in his 70s. He apologized for not noticing my mill's passing sooner and said there's something he urgently needed to give me. Is it a letter from my mill? I was taken aback to learn she'd been in contact with an attorney, and the idea of receiving a letter from someone deceased didn't make sense. I suspected it might be some sort of scam, but the thought that it could genuinely be from my mill made me decide to meet the lawyer. The letter read, "I know this sudden note from me might surprise you, but please listen. There's danger coming your way. Trust my words and run away immediately." I looked up and asked the attorney sitting in front of me, "Sir, are you aware of this letter's content? Was my mill being targeted by someone?" The handwriting indeed belonged to my mill. Her distinct handwriting was unmistakable, but the content made no sense to me. It felt like a scene straight out of a drama, and I could only think it was some kind of cruel prank. My mill died in a car accident, but the driver has already been apprehended. The driver testified that he didn't see her right away because she was lying on the road. There were signs that my mill had been hit, and it was suggested that she probably lost consciousness from the blow. If this letter is genuine, it suggests that my mill knew the person who assaulted her. Did my mill know she was getting involved in some kind of trouble? If so, why didn't she run away? I felt tears welling up again. The lawyer, with composure, said, "I haven't read the contents, but I have an idea of what it might be about." I was slightly annoyed by his roundabout way of speaking and asked, "So, what did my mill tell you?" Yes, I was the attorney for a young man named Michael at the time, and she asked for my help regarding you. Who is this Michael? According to the lawyer, my husband apparently has a brother who is 6 years older than him. I hadn't heard a word from my mill or my husband about this, nor had I ever seen any photos. The lawyer took out what appeared to be a file of documents from a bag next to the table. "Did you know, Mrs. Emily, that in our country, half of the serious crimes happen within families? It's ironic, isn't it? In what should be the most comforting and happiest place, tragic incidents occur where a beloved family member takes the life of another. Saying this, he showed me an old photograph. It depicted 4 people. There was a young man who looked like a parent, a boy, and a baby. The young woman looked familiar, definitely my Mill. I initially thought I didn't recognize the young man, but he bore some resemblance to my husband. The boy's face resembles the young man's, and they clearly look like father and son. It probably was taken during a trip to the beach. They are all in front of a big ship at the harbor, all of them wearing happy smiles. That boy holding the float, that's Jacob, the lawyer said. I gazed at the boy, my husband's brother whom I never knew. Despite the joy evident in this picture, I couldn't help but feel a pain in my chest, wondering what had happened. So you being a lawyer means Jacob got into some trouble. Was it Jacob who assaulted my Mill this time? It's been at least 15 years since my husband and I got married, including the time we dated. It's been 17, maybe 18 years. Otherwise, it doesn't make sense that I wouldn't know anything. Yes, Jacob started to become reclusive due to bullying the summer of his 7th grade. He caused an incident 7 years after. I heard Jacob, after years of being a shut-in, grew desperate about his future and tried to end it with his family. Late at night on the day of the crime, he entered his parents' room with a knife. Woken by the noise, his father confronted him. Even though his father got seriously injured, he managed to restrain Jacob. The incident was thwarted. However, during the struggle between Jacob and his father, my husband, who was 14 at the time, heard his Mill screams and called the police. Soon, cop cars and ambulances arrived, causing a stir in the quiet suburb. Back then, terms like shut-in and unemployed youth were hot societal topics. Newspapers and TV sensationally reported things like reclusive teen plans to end it with family. I thought it sounded familiar from some news I had heard, but I couldn't tell if it was about my husband's family. Similar stories were often in the news after all. But for those involved, it's not just another story. My husband's family couldn't handle the local gossip and rumors, so they moved several times, almost like fleeing in the night. Whether it was due to the serious injury or the stress that followed, I heard that the father passed away a few years later. The mother and my husband changed their names to the mother's maiden name, and finally managed to lead a normal life where they are now. When both the perpetrator and the victim are family, there's no outlet for the emotions. It's hard to feel intense anger or hatred. Anyone would be confused if suddenly placed in such a complicated position. Living amidst public scrutiny, gossip, and backlash is very tough. I hope you can understand the feelings of those who passed away and couldn't talk to you, Naomi. She summarized. I was at a loss for words, too overwhelmed by the story. I had never thought about what happens to a family after such an incident, but life goes on as long as you're alive. For the in-laws, young Jason must have been their beloved child too. In the photos they showed me, Jason had a smile resembling my husband's. But due to unresolved issues, akin to a misbuttoned shirt, they faced the worst tragedy. After that, it was decided that Jason would serve a prison sentence. The lawyer began. I mentioned earlier that I was Jason's defense attorney, right? Even if it's an attempted crime, the same punishment applies. It could be life imprisonment or a sentence between 5 to 20 years. I interrupted him. At least 5 years. Does that mean Jason might have already been released? Yes, he was actually released about 2 years ago. According to the lawyer, there's a system in the DA's office similar to a victim notification system here. After a verdict is finalized, you can approach the DA's office and request to be notified of the offender's scheduled release date, or if they've been actually released. Even without that, Mill was Jason's biological mother. She was informed about his residence after his release. Around that time, my husband was diagnosed with cancer and was undergoing treatment. Mill didn't want to worry him, so she chose not to discuss it with him. Jason told me at the time that he committed the crime because he was pessimistic about the future. The lawyer hesitated a bit and added, but it seems it was for quick cash, he informed me. Jason, having been shut in for years, had been secretly using his Mills credit card to play paid online games and shop for his favorite items. And he'd often get scolded by his fill for it. On the day of the incident, in the evening, Jason apparently spent quite a bit of money on in-game weapons and had his computer confiscated. Jason lied to the lawyer, and neither his Phil, Mill, nor my husband said anything even though they knew the truth. Perhaps the family chose not to expose the truth about the slander Jason faced after his release, hoping he would genuinely repent and serve his time. In fact, Mill occasionally visited Jason while he was incarcerated. But each time, she returned disappointed with Jason's unchanged and unrepentant attitude. Mill was afraid to live with Jason again after his release. Of course, there was the risk of violence, but she knew that if either her son or she passed away, Jason would likely come to me for money. As the scheduled release date neared, there was an increase in complicated paperwork to handle. Deciding where he would live also became a concern. Mill, feeling overwhelmed, consulted the lawyer who was familiar with the case, who agreed to handle the necessary procedures on her behalf. How was Jason supporting himself 2 years ago? Upon asking, it turned out that Mill, through the lawyer, had rented an apartment for Jason and had been financially assisting him. He seemed to have managed his shopping online. Mill had apparently given Jason her savings, funds set aside for her retirement, and her inheritance share for when her son, her own flesh and blood, passed away. After his release, Jason reverted back to being a recluse and didn't work. With funds being limited, Mill conveyed through the lawyer, "I can't support you forever. I wish you'd find a job and work." Jason firmly refused. "Don't you care about me, Mom? Always doting on my younger brother. Not giving me money is his doing, isn't it?" He made a huge fuss. The lawyer mentioned the deceased was genuinely worried Jason might get into trouble. He kept urging me to give him money. Jason's tone became aggressive towards the lawyer, and he inquired in detail about Mill's earnings and his father and brother's current lives. Fortunately, I believe he doesn't know our address, but the fact that the deceased was found near Jason's apartment is concerning. That's when I remembered the missing bag. Just then, the doorbell rang. The only expected visitor is the lawyer. "Excuse me for a moment." I head to the entrance after excusing myself. I have a bad feeling about this. Peeking through the door's peephole, I see a man resembling my husband. In his hand, I spot the bag my Mill used to carry. Quietly stepping back, I return to the living room and call out to the lawyer. "I think it's probably a guy named John, resembling Yoshiyuki. He's holding my Mill's bag." My voice rises in panic, and the lawyer's face tightens. "Call the cops now." He might have meant to use the phone, but in my panic, I bolted out the back door and dashed straight into the nearby police station. Did my Mill and husband foresee this situation? Or maybe they chose a house close to the police subconsciously. I can't tell now. Later, seeing the police officers who came with me, John tried to flee but was quickly apprehended and taken in for questioning. As I suspected, the man resembling my husband was John, essentially my brother-in-law. The lawyer must have been using an old nickname calling him Little John. And having seen old family photos with his innocent face, I got caught up and called him that too. But in reality, he looked like an unhealthy middle-aged man. It irked me how much he looked like my husband. This man tormented my Mill and husband. I just came to get my share. There's an inheritance from Mom, right? I heard my brother passed away last year. Hand over my part. Ignoring the officer's questions, he shouted at me. The nerve of him. I snapped. I do feel for him being bullied as a kid and not going to school. But his actions afterward were selfish and unforgivable. Most importantly, I confronted him. "Isn't that Mill's purse you're holding? What did you do to her? Did you lay your hands on a frail woman?" The officers also glanced at the bag John was holding. John tried to hastily hide it, but it was too late. As one of the officers reached for it, John attempted to bite him. "Hey, this is my money, it's fair." Mill said it was the last straw. She was being cheeky. "So I just gave her a few pinches to make her reflect." John's mindset is chilling. He doesn't listen or show any remorse. And on top of that, "Hey, you're my brother's wife, right? With both Mill and my brother gone, you have a duty to support me." Perhaps Mill and my husband were afraid of this situation and chose not to tell me about John's existence. They probably thought it'd be better if I stayed out of it if I didn't know. No, Nancy has no such obligation. The lawyer tried to intervene, but I doubted any law would get through to John. In the end, John seems to be someone with nothing to lose, a man who thinks he's invincible. He doesn't get our common sense, and I can't imagine he has any intention of obeying the law. Maybe that's why Mill didn't want me to ever meet him. I can only imagine the hardships she went through. I haven't read everything yet, but Mill left me a letter expressing concern for me even when she knew her life was in danger. The depth of Mill's pain and sadness is heart-wrenching. Do you realize how much pain you've caused Mill and my husband because of your actions? I'll never forgive you. I'll make sure you face the full force of the law. It's true that the immediate cause was being struck by a car. However, he left an unconscious Mill on the road. He's not fit to be out in society. I vowed to do whatever it takes to send him back to prison. Seeing my determination, the lawyer beside me said, "I'll help you with this." Brandon was then taken away by the police. From the blood on Mill's purse and the circumstantial evidence, the culprit was identified as the brother-in-law and he was sent back to prison. I returned home with the lawyer and finished reading the letter from Mill. Her letter was full of apologies to me and overflowing with love. Especially at the end, seeing the words, "Life is still long. Sarah, please live a happier and freer life." I couldn't hold back my tears.